Today on Escape the Clock, we're tackling a fundamental question. What happens when the thing you love to do is the hardest thing to get paid for? Because for most creative people, writers, artists, podcasters, and makers of all kinds, the numbers are brutal. The Authors Guild surveyed more than 5,000 authors and found that the median income for full-time published writers is just over $10,000. That's a 42% collapse in earnings over the last decade. And the broader creator economy tells the same story. Despite the hype and the highlights reels, 96% of content creators earn under $100,000 annually, and fewer than 5% treat it as a full-time job. So how does one actually build the financial foundation to pursue a creative life without gambling their family's security on a dream that may never pay? On today's show, I'm speaking with Brent Lindstrom. He spent years in construction, not because he loved it, but because it paid the bills, while he quietly built a financial runway and a writing career on the side. He used scenario planning, real estate, and disciplined compounding to reach financial independence on his own terms. Stay tuned to learn how to finance your passion so that you never have to starve for your art. Welcome back to Escape the Clock, show where we highlight strategies and approaches for achieving financial freedom and having the option not to work. I'm your host, Daniel C. Rogers. There's something romantic about the idea of the starving artist. Follow your heart, struggle for your craft, and the suffering will make the result all that much more magical. But the reality is a lot more bleak than in the movies. According to a survey by the Authors Guild, the median income for a full-time author is barely over $10,000 a year. $10,000 is low for even poverty-level standards of living. That means that's a life of constant financial stress. And that reality does not fuel creativity. It can suffocate it. It means less money for supplies, traveling to find inspiration, promoting your work. Worse, if you're worried about how to pay for groceries next week, you're not going to take creative risks. You're going to focus on paying the bills, not making art. That doesn't mean that DIY artistic careers are dead. If your dream is to make music, write books, take photos, or make movies, you can do it. But you need to have a plan to pay your bills so that you can do your art on your terms. And that is exactly what Brent Lindstrom did. Brent is the host of the Light-Minded Arts podcast and an independent filmmaker. But before he was telling his stories, he was a general contractor working 50 hours a week. Didn't just quit his job and hope for the best. He spent a decade building a portfolio of real estate and investments to buy his freedom first. Brent, welcome to Escape the Clock.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Brent, excited to talk to you because I have a very similar aspiration. I love writing. That writing is my thing. I've always dreamt of being a writer. And now that I have my financial freedom, that's what I do. I write books and I enjoy it so much. But I know for you, you were doing years in construction. And construction is very different than art, right? Like, I mean, you're building a wall. You can see it's very tangible.
Yeah, there's a lot of creativity that I was able to pull into my construction, but you're right, it's completely different. Like when I was doing it, maybe I was doing finished carpentry for a while, and I take a lot of pride in how I created the moldings or different things for somebody's house, and being able to stand back and look at that had its own artistic satisfaction for me. But it's really different because when I actually started trying to write, because I wasn't making much money when I was first starting out in the construction industry, I wanted a side job where I could stay at home and support my family a little bit better. And I kind of got addicted to the writing. It was a really fun, artistic way to express myself. But yeah, they're different completely.
And now that you're doing the writing, I was curious how that mindset shift happened, because you went from kind of working for a paycheck to kind of going out on your own terms. And I think I remember reading that you said they were making something around $45K a year or something in construction with a family.
Yeah.
You're trying to feed, that's a really tight margin. Yeah. How did you make that transition?
Yeah, it was really tight. That's why I decided to try writing, because I was working probably 10 to 12 hours every day. And my wife said, well, I went up to her. I'm like, hey, can I get a side job? I think we need to make a little bit more money. And she said, yeah, you can get a side job as long as it doesn't take you out of the house any more than you already are. And so that's when I landed upon writing, and maybe I could do that as the side job. And honestly, it didn't really make me any more money than anything before. In fact, it was kind of like a hobby. It ended up costing more money than anything, but it became that hobby. It became something that I really enjoyed doing. Yeah, though there was a bit of a mindset shift. So you asked me about how it was moving from the construction field into more of a full-time creative sort of a career. I almost got to say that the switch wasn't as different from what I was normally doing, because if anything, the construction industry taught me a really strong work ethic. You're getting up at the butt crack of dawn. You're going to work somewhere. You're getting on the job site as soon as the municipal laws will allow you to start making a ruckus. And you're working, at least for me, until dark. So I had this mindset of just going to work, getting as much done in a day as I possibly could, and then coming home, spending what time I could with the family, and then going back out and doing it all again. And now that I'm doing more of a creative thing, it's not one of those things where it's like, am I in the mood to write today? I don't know. No, I wake up at the butt crack of dawn still. I get as much work done as I can in the hours that I have. And I don't say, well, my writing muse isn't with me today, so I'm not going to write today. I can't do that. It's just not part of who I am. So I treat it like any other job that I've ever had.
Do you consider yourself an artist who was slaving away at general contracting, or were you just more of a general contractor trying to redefine themselves to be an artist?
I grew up in the construction industry my whole life, basically. And when I was a teenager, I said, I am never going to move into the construction industry. And so I moved into the construction industry. I would say that there's been a lot of good times in the construction industry, but I'd say that at some point the passion for it started ebbing as the writing and the filmmaking started becoming more of a thing. So it's really hard to define a moment when I said I'm an artist doing a construction job versus I'm a contractor who likes to do art. It was really hard. It kind of just slowly started merging and melding until I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to be probably both in some degree for most of my life.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think a lot of us, we treat work as a means to an end. We have to provide for our families, but we are this aspiration of what we want to be. So for you, I imagine you had to get pretty organized financially to make this shift. Did you have like specific financial goals or money goals you were trying to get to before you knew you could stop doing that work as a general contractor?
I did, yeah. I realized at some point there that I needed to create a financial plan. I needed to also level up my storytelling skills if I was going to do this full time. And so what I basically did is I said, all right, I'm not the best storyteller yet. I'm not financially independent enough to do this full time yet. But in 10 years, I should be able to achieve both of those goals if I work really hard at it. And so I did. I put together this 10-year plan where I said, all right, I'm going to come home from work and I'm going to spend a lot of time studying my craft, and I'm going to spend a lot of time studying money. The money thing, I enjoy studying that before. I actually got a degree in finance and, eventually got an MBA, but I wanted to spend the next 10 years building up a portfolio, and I did. I said, you know what? I have this end goal. I need to be making this much each year to support me and my family and my art. And I basically put together a spreadsheet because I love spreadsheets. And I did a best case, middle case, and worst case scenario on how much money I need to make and how much money I could get off of that as an investment to support us. So it's like, well, what if the best I can ever do, this was my worst case scenario, was 5% a year. You can make that. If you can't make 5% a year on your investments, then you got no business investing your money probably. But
That's true.
But there's so many ways to make at least 5% out there. And then I had a middle case where I was saying, you know what, if I can make what the market returns, which is anywhere between 8 and 11% on most normal years, then that's my middle case scenario. And then my best case scenario was being able to make in excess of what the market makes, and usually around 16 15% or more. And so that's what I did. I basically took my worst case scenario and my best case scenario, and I was like, you know what? Whatever one of these scenarios hit, I need an end figure that works for me for all three of those categories. And so that was my goal. I put that together, and the first couple of years was like, this doesn't feel like I'm going to achieve this. And then as time went on, compounding hit, and basically my skills, my knowledge, different things were growing, and I was able to hit those numbers. But actually halfway through there is when I decided to do filmmaking, and then filmmaking, that costs a lot of money, more than writing books, so I had to actually adjust that number even higher for that too.
Well, kudos to you. That's why I'm doing this and teaching that literally anyone can make a plan to hit goals as long as we're reasonable about the style of living that we're trying to achieve for. And going off such a small amount of income and realizing that given some time with compounding, you can make your goals and that you are doing that work, that's really amazing. So can you go a little deeper into some of the financial pieces there? Did you have to deal with debt first? Did you end up borrowing money for leverage to get ahead? Like what types of moves and things did you do to help you hit your goals?
Before I even started this 10-year plan, I was very financially conscious. I was trying to avoid as much debt as I could and things. But one of my goals was to get married. And I'm like, well, I can't do this on my own. I'm not that attractive of a guy. And, I don't have that great of a personality. So why would any woman ever want me? I was like, well, maybe if I own my own house. I've heard that helps. And so it does, by the way. But anyhow, so I wanted to own my own place, and I said, you know what? I can't afford a nice house. At the time, a lot of the houses around me were going for $200,000 or more. In Utah now, it's like $200,000. Yikes, you can't even buy the land for that anymore. But I couldn't afford that. And so I started looking at some more ghetto areas. Yes, Utah does have some more ghetto-ish areas. Not many, but they do have some. And I was able to find a condo in one of those riskier neighborhoods where, you move in and you get to know the policeman better than the mailman. So I found this place. It was going for about $50,000. And I still didn't have the money for that. I'd saved up maybe 10 grand is all from college and different things. I'd worked putting myself through college, so I didn't have any student debt. So what I ended up doing, I was like, well, I'm going to try to game the system a little bit here. And so I took out credit card debt, which is usually a really big no-no. But I found the credit cards that said, we'll give you 0% interest for 1 year or 2 years or whatever. And I maxed them all out, cash out, bought the place on 0% interest. And then, because at the time, these condos were so bad that no bank would lend on them. And so, yeah, I basically lived off of nothing but rice and eggs for 2 years. While I paid off the entire credit card debt, did not have to pay a single penny in interest. And so that's how I got into my condo. And then, lo and behold, I got my wife. So, hey, that worked out. But yeah, and then from there, it was a matter of keeping up that frugal lifestyle. I luckily married a woman who was very frugal, and we were able to live off of practically nothing for the first several years of our marriage. We even had a kid about a year and a half in. Our first kid was born. And so we were starting a family, and I still wasn't making hardly anything, but we weren't spending hardly anything either at the time. And everything we got, we saved up, we started investing, and yeah, even for Christmas, we had a big windstorm. We went and just cut down branches off of the fallen trees for our Christmas tree. I mean, we were living as cheap as we could.
So you were really doing the life of sacrifice then, in the beginning at least.
Absolutely.
Until you could get that margin that you needed to start to snowball.
Yeah.
To really being able to be more comfortable toward your goals. Now, throughout that time, financially, were you evolving in any of your strategies? Now, like, it makes sense. You got to deal with that debt first. That's a negative compounding that will just hold you in place forever if you don't deal with that, especially consumer debt like credit card.
Yeah.
Did you get to a point where you realized, okay, there's certain investment strategies that would work really well? Where like you looking like ETFs or something that you saw long compound growth in? Or were you thinking about, I have to balance it with retirement accounts? You said you have a child. You're thinking about college savings. How are you handling your portfolio considering you really didn't have a ton of income? at least at the time?
So at the time, one of the goals I had was to get into a house that I'd feel comfortable raising my family in. Time we weren't in that. Because that was around the time after I had my daughter is when I started my 10-year plan. And at the time, all I had ever done was day trading and investing and in the stock market. And I wasn't any good at it. And I knew I wasn't any good at it because every time I would make a few grand in the markets, I would lose a few grand the next month. And I just couldn't get ahead. And so I said, you know what? I am not ready to be the investor that I need to be right yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invest in my future home and in my knowledge. And so that's what I did. We ended up getting a new property and I built the house myself. I built the house with putting all my sweat equity into it. And I think we built it for $255,000, and our condo we were able to sell for the down payment to afford the mortgage on that. And we did the same thing we did with the other thing. You know, we didn't buy it on credit card this time, but we got a good interest rate, and we weren't happy with that interest rate. We decided we're going to make sure that we're out of debt, and by the time we're out of debt, then we should be able to start putting more money away into investments. And so we made double and triple payments every single month on that, no matter whether or not we could afford it. You know, we sacrificed, we scrimped, and paid that thing off in like 7 years. And while we were doing that, I was at my construction company and I was finally getting above the 45K threshold. And every extra penny that we made, we put back into the company. I don't know if you've read the book, The Richest Man in Babylon.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things he recommends is putting away 10% towards investments every time you get paid. And I think at the time we were probably, even while doing double and triple payments on our mortgage, we were still putting away well in excess of that 10% every time we got paid. And we were investing it in the family company that we were part of, the construction company there. And so that's how my investing didn't really start until I started investing in the company. And while I was doing that, I was learning how to do the stock market thing and getting myself out of my mortgage debt. Because, you know, even though I was only paying like 3.5% interest or whatever at the time, I wasn't happy with it because to me at the time, it would feel so much more freeing to not have that debt. Whereas now my thoughts might be a little different on that. But at the time, I needed to feel debt free.
So you didn't just rely on one thing. And actually, the studies show that's the way to do this. There was this study by the IRS on the top 400 individual income tax returns that showed that the wealthiest individuals have 7 distinct streams of income. They show that it's not just one way that you need to do your capital stacks. You need to have many of them. And when you start to do that, and it can be real estate, dividends, and your W-2 wages and your investment. It could be whatever you want, right? It's not like you're working 7 jobs.
Right.
But for you, you know, you had your construction salary. Sounds like you were getting into real estate. You were doing your stock. You said day trading. I know you got into options trading too. You also have your art. I'm not sure how you were potentially profiting from that, if you were getting royalties. But can you talk a little bit, like, did one of those things do the heavy lifting for you? Or did you find all of those things were just contributing to the sum of the whole?
I would say that one of them primarily did the heavy lifting, at least especially at first, and that was the real estate development company that I was in. So when I first started in there, you know, I mean, growing up, I circled through all the trades, and it's one of the things my wife loves about me is there's nothing on our house I can't fix. But as I got going through that, I was able to fast track myself into more of the management end of it. And as I got doing that, I was able to start investing more in the company, and the company was able to start paying me more out of the profits because of that. And so that's probably where a lot of the heavy lifting started happening. But the thing is every time I got paid out of the company, I mean, it got to be the point where I was making my salary, and then I was also making profit sharing from the company. And not once would I take any of that profit sharing and keep it for myself. I always reinvested that back into the company until the point where I was reinvesting probably, I'd say 80% of all income I got back into the real estate development company. And the more money that I got in there. And, that's the way investing is too. You start out slow and it feels like such a gradual accumulation. Those first few years, it's like, man, I am not hitting my goals. I wanted to have a lot more money by the time I hit 30 or whatever. And I feel like I'm moving at a snail's pace. But if you keep that up, then eventually it starts compounding and then it starts growing more exponentially. And that's kind of what happened in the real estate company. It took a few years to actually start catching, but eventually I was able to get that on more of an exponential growth path. And at that same time is about the time when my dad was retiring and I was able to take over that company along with my brother. And so we were able to basically run our own business where we were at that point now the primary equity holders in the company.
Do you still do that, or are you a full-time artist now?
I still do that about 2 days a week.
Gotcha.
Last year, January 25, I basically told everyone, I'm like, okay, I am done now. I'll still come in twice a week to help out in any way I can. I stepped down from president. I'm now vice president there. I still have a lot of money invested in there, and so I'm still financially involved in there, and it still helps me. But yeah, I am now, I consider myself full-time with the writing and the filmmaking, even though technically it's probably more like 3 days a week, but it's still the primary focus.
Do you consider yourself financially independent?
I do.
And now that you're able to work full-time on your art, I know you do filmmaking, you're a writer. Have you found that that process has had a return on your investment as well, or is it just fully a creative endeavor?
That one is a lot like the investment curve. You start out really slow, and the more you build up your audience, the quicker things will start growing. But yeah, I would say that right now, the art could never come close to supporting me. Right now, it sometimes feels like a hobby, and that can almost be discouraging because at some point you're like, I'm spending all this time creating these things, and I can't look at it from a financial perspective, because if I do that, I'll just get depressed and I'll be like, well, how am I ever going to get this out there? How am I going to get it noticed? I've spent the last 10 years or more working on my craft, and my craft is at a really good level now, but it's one of those things that if I was to look at it from a return on investment side, it'd be like, well, I'm spending most of my time doing something that makes hardly any money in return. And eventually the idea is that it'll be like those investments where eventually I'll find that audience. I'll find those people who discover me and want to keep buying things from me. And so, yeah, it's an investment, but it's not an investment that I would say has, I guess, come to term yet.
I completely get that. Like, I do the writing thing, I do the voice acting, and it's a lot of sweat equity.
It is.
That's what it is. Can you maybe, for the audience who isn't aware of what it's like, can you talk a little bit about the tools and the process, or your particular process, and what you're doing day to day in your craft, how you're mastering it, how you're getting your work out there, how you're trying to, get paid for it as well?
Yeah, so I'll start with how I'm getting paid for it first, because that's the first thing I always wake up to. When I get up in the morning, I get ready for the day. I do my workouts. I do all that best I can. And I'm used to getting up early, so I'm always trying to get up by 5:30 in the morning to get these things done. And while I'm doing my workouts and things, I am doing research on the markets. I've got my phone with me while I'm working out, and I'm listening to all the talking heads. I'm listening to, what's happening in gold or in silver, or I'm listening to what's happening with Nvidia. I'm just learning as much as I can about the market for that day and kind of what's happening. And then by the time that's all done, I go and sit down at the computer just before the market opens, and I start trading. And I will do that for about 30 minutes every morning. And when I'm done with that, then I switch focus. I will maybe go through and answer my emails for about half an hour to an hour. And then from there, it is straight into writing, and I do my writing for the next few hours until noon. And that's it's almost a religious habit now. I follow that routine every morning, except for those 2 days where I go in to do my real estate job. So I do those on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Those are my dedicated real estate construction days. And really, I'm not swinging hammers there either. It's more of managing the company, managing the real estate investments. And if I've got other real estate deals going on, I fit those into that time frame also. And then in the afternoon is dedicated entirely to the visual aspect of my creation. I do a lot of my podcasting, my YouTube creation at that time. I also do short films during that time. And I do, I'll film skits, I'll film anything. It's completely dedicated to my visual formats.
And for your content, are you looking for advertising revenue? Are you looking for affiliate revenue? Are you just trying to get royalties for, sales of, scripts or books? Like how are you looking to make sure you're getting profited for your ownership?
So for all my content that I put out there, YouTube, podcasting, all that stuff, I am mostly working towards building an audience. I'm not concerned so much about the financial return at this time because the idea is, at least for me, my shows focus mainly on kind of what we're talking about right now is how you can avoid the struggling artist trap so that you can focus on being a working creative, basically. You can follow your dreams and, it doesn't apply just to writers. It can apply to just about anybody, whatever their passion is. Maybe they want to be sailors, go and live on a sailboat their whole life, whatever. But the idea is that if I can help artists not just be struggling artists, I feel like a lot of people, especially in the independent community, are more open to learning more about other people's independent art. I know that me and my wife, we watch a lot of independent film. I read a lot of books by self-published authors. I enjoy finding a lot of those gems. And so by building an audience based off of a skill that I know that I feel like I'm good and competent at, I'm giving something to them for free. I'm helping them out, and maybe they'll be more open to giving my art a try. And that's basically the return that I'm looking for, is just that trust to spend some time reading my books or watching some of the movies that I put out, things like that.
Yeah, the real gift is people giving us their time to actually consume the things we're making. I get that. And I know some people, when they get that audience, they'll look at Patreon and things like that because they realize the audience is appreciative of the work and they'll give back in that way. Since you do this now, like you have your podcast, it's a great podcast. And I was hoping that you could answer two last questions.
Sure.
First, if you were talking to an artist, a young artist, a very young creator you want to mentor this person, first, what would you tell them is the financial things they should be doing to shortcut the pain of being a starving artist? And then second, what would be the craft pieces that you would guide them on from your journey? And it could be anything from platforms to use to just the way you present yourself. How would you mentor that person?
First is probably the shortcut to becoming financially stable enough to do your art. And my biggest advice is there is no shortcut. You need to learn about money. I know that as an artist, you might think money is scary. Maybe I don't understand anything about money. But money, if you understand money, you understand a lot of how the world works. You can see things in a different perspective. And that money is so important if you want to focus on your art. And I would spend as much time as you can learning how to build that up. Like I said, there's no get rich quick scheme. There's no shortcuts to this. YouTube is going to tell you the opposite. They're going to tell you, well, I made $1 million in 1 month, and here's how you can do it too.
All right.
And for a lot of people, that's not as easy as they make it look. But if you put the time and effort into learning those skills, learning how to become financially savvy, you can still do your art at the same time. time, I was learning how to do writing and filmmaking at the same time that I was building up a nest egg that would allow me, and I won't call it a nest egg, it's like you said, multiple, a whole bushel of nest eggs, basically. But you're building up a lot of experience there and the ability to do what you want full time. And that way you don't have to wait until you retire. You can you can do these both hand in hand. But it does take work, and it does take actually sitting down and learning these things. If there was a piece of advice that I would give an artist who wants to work on their craft, I'd say don't wait until you're financially stable. Yes, keep working on the financially stable aspect of it, but spend at least an hour or two each day working on your craft. And whether that's writing, whether it's painting, you're not going to get good at it by watching YouTube videos that tell you how to be good at it. You're not going to get good at it by imagining someday when you can afford it, you'll get good at it. The only way to do it is to spend a little time learning and a lot of time practicing.
Well, Brent, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey and your successes with the audience. How can everyone connect with you and also your podcast, Light-Minded Arts?
Yeah, you can find me at lightmindedarts.com. I run a blog there. I also have all my books, and I show a lot of my short films there. Also, you can find me at the Light-Minded Arts podcast, or run on over to YouTube and you can find me there. It's just Light-Minded Arts. Everything's Light-Minded Arts, guys.
You made it easy. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks.
My conversation with Brent Lindstrom was one of those interviews that sounds, on the surface, like a story about art, but it's really a story about patience, discipline, and one of the most underrated financial strategies that there is, buying yourself the freedom to do what you want and to do what you love. Brent didn't start as an artist. He started in construction, swinging hammers and managing job sites, working 10 to 12-hour days. It wasn't his calling, but it put food on the table. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, he started writing quietly on the side, hoping it might one day provide something the job site never could: escape. What's remarkable isn't that he eventually made the leap, it's how he built the runway to do it safely. Brent had a finance degree and a construction worker's work ethic, and he put both of those things to use. He built spreadsheets with 3 scenarios, the worst case being a 5% annual return, a middle path at 8 to 11%, and a best case north of 16%. He gave himself a 10-year plan and committed to making any of those outcomes work for him. Not just the best case, all 3. And that kind of scenario planning is rare, because most of us will fixate on the best case and are surprised when life delivers something closer to the floor. The data backs up just how precarious that creative path really is. According to a Mellon Foundation's National Survey of Artists, more than 57% of working artists in America report being worried about at least one form of financial vulnerability. It can be food, housing, medical care, or utilities. And the median annual income from a primary artistic job, that's just $15,000. That is not enough to survive off of. I don't care where you live. And Brent was determined not to become that statistic. He didn't do it with a lucky break or a viral moment or a scratch ticket. He did it with a playbook that honestly anyone could use. He bought in a poor neighborhood to keep his costs low. He used 0% APR credit cards strategically and paid them in full every month. He got married and kept a frugal lifestyle, even when things started to improve. And he used his construction skills to build a new property as an investment, a home he finished for $250,000, and then began aggressively paying that down, 2, sometimes 3 mortgage payments at a time. And 7 years later, it was paid off completely. Now, only about 27.7% of American homeowners under the age of 65 are mortgage-free. Brent made it into that club with purpose and well ahead of schedule. And he did all of that on a double-figure salary, not a triple-figure salary. All is about using those margins. He was also quietly stacking other assets. He was putting more than 10% of every paycheck into the family real estate company. He was receiving profit sharing, which he reinvested every cent of, and he dabbled in the stock market. He lost money at first and then stopped, went back to school, learned, and came back better prepared. And there's a lesson in that. Brent didn't power through with ignorance and tough lessons learned and painful money lost. He stopped and he recalibrated and he came back when he was ready. That's actually really smart, and it's something that I took away from my conversation with Brent, because I'll be honest, I didn't always do it that way myself, and I think that really cost me. And when I asked him what did the heavy lifting on the financial side, his answer was really clear. It was the real estate company, his main investment, and that made sense for him because that was where his human capital sung. He understood how to do construction. He was a general contractor. He didn't know the stock market. He didn't force himself to apply himself there. He went where his skills were. And the compounding from that really paid off for him in a big way, but it took time. And that wait can be quite painful. And he said so himself, that investing feels painfully slow and you might think you'll never get there, but if you keep it up, then it'll compound and eventually can become exponential. That is the whole game. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And once he had built that financial foundation, he made the transition to writing full time and eventually into doing movies and other creative endeavors. He's given himself the freedom to explore whatever interest he has without consequence. He's now financially independent, works 2 days a week with his company as a vice president, and he spends the rest of the time just doing his craft, taking the discipline from his work life and applying it into his creative endeavors and his financial independence. But here's the part that matters for every creative person listening. The art has not yet produced a financial return. He's still working on that. He's in his growth phase. He's building his audience. He's doing the work. And he's okay with that because he can be, because he built the foundation first. He said it plainly. There's no shortcut to financial stability, and he's right about that. But for him, he realized that taking his time to do self-education and applying his discipline, then he could provide himself the equity to start to pursue his passion. And you can do the same. Anyone can do that, but we can't skip the foundation. But we don't have to wait. We can start building our skills now, doing our passions, our writing, our podcasting, our voice acting, our painting, our sketching, whatever it happens to be, whatever we're interested in. If it's music, it doesn't matter. We don't have to wait. Build the skills now while doing the financial literacy and applying the financial strategies. And that is the lesson that every aspiring artist, writer, podcaster, and creative entrepreneur needs to hear. The craft and the capital are not in competition. They are partners, and we can build them both. Brent's story reminds me of what this show is really ultimately about. Escape the Clock is not about retiring early. It's about designing a life with enough financial stability underneath you that you can spend your hours doing what actually matters to you. It might mean being done with work at 45. Or it might mean writing your first novel at 52, or starting a business that you never considered that you would go into. It doesn't matter. It's whatever your passion leads you to. And it's because you've done the right moves to create freedom from that paycheck that keeps so many of us trapped. I'd love to hear from you. What is the passion that you are financing? Email me at contact@escapetheclock.com or leave a comment where you listen. I'm Daniel C. Rogers. Thank you for listening. And best of luck building the foundation that sets your passion free and escape the clock. I'll catch you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember, while I'm not yet a financial planner, I am getting my degree in wealth management. You should take anything you've heard here as tips and advice to making your plan. To learn more, visit www.escapetheclock.com. There, you can find the book, resources, including the planner, and you can even schedule time with me. Please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.